The air over Nazi-occupied Europe was thick with danger. Every day, young men climbed into the belly of massive bombers, knowing that the sky above Germany was a battlefield where survival was never guaranteed. These were the brave crews of the B-17 flying fortresses, men who flew straight into hell at 25,000 feet, dodging flak and enemy fighters to strike at the heart of the Third Reich's war machine. For the Allied airmen of the 8th Air Force, every mission was a gamble with death. The odds of survival were grim, losses were high, and the Luftwaffe was relentless. Crews would take off in the early hours of the morning, knowing full well that by the time they returned, if they returned, many of their fellow airmen would be missing. The sound of roaring engines and the nervous chatter of the flight crew became a routine part of life. Yet every mission carried with it the same heavy sense of dread. On November 29, 1943, one of these missions was underway. Hundreds of B-17s filled the sky, their powerful engines humming in unison as they formed up into tight formations. They were headed for Bremen, a heavily industrialized city in northern Germany. This wasn't just any bombing run. It was a strike on the factories producing the Nazi war machine. Precision bombing was crucial, but the bombers had to get through enemy airspace first. Among the countless crews preparing for the fight was the team aboard Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, a B-17F from the 96th Bomb Group. Each man had his station, his duty, and his role in keeping the aircraft in the fight. The aircraft commander and co-pilot handled navigation and flight controls, while the bombardier and navigator prepared for the run over the target. The gunners were scattered across the aircraft, ready to fend off the inevitable attacks from German fighters. The crew of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi knew what they were flying into. Bremen was heavily defended, not just by the dreaded German anti-aircraft flak guns, but by waves of Luftwaffe fighters eager to tear apart any bombers that strayed from formation. The key to survival was sticking together, overlapping fields of fire to create a deadly web of bullets that could discourage enemy pilots from getting too close. As the formation crossed into enemy territory, the tension inside each aircraft grew. The gunners scanned the skies, watching for the first signs of enemy resistance. The formation was still intact, but everyone knew that the deeper they went, the greater the threat became. Then suddenly, the radio crackled with a warning. Bandits inbound. Fighters at 12 o'clock high. It had begun. The men aboard Rikki-Tikki-Tavi had been through this routine before. Wake up before dawn, grab a quick breakfast, attend the mission briefing, then strap into their aircraft, waiting for takeoff. The target, Bremen, a heavily defended city filled with factories critical to the German war effort. It was a high-stakes mission, one that required flying deep into enemy airspace and braving both anti-aircraft fire and the ruthless Luftwaffe. B-17s were designed to be tough. They had earned the nickname Flying Fortress for good reason. The aircraft was heavily armored, its skin riddled with machine gun positions that could unleash a storm of bullets against any attacker. But even fortresses had their limits. The crews relied on their tight formations to protect one another. A lone B-17 was an easy target for the German fighter planes that patrolled the skies, waiting for any sign of weakness. It wasn't long before Rikki-Tikki-Tavi experienced a problem. A mechanical issue forced the aircraft to slow down slightly, just enough to fall behind the rest of the formation. It was a death sentence. Within moments, German fighters pounced. From his perch in the tail, Moran saw them coming. Bf-109s and FW-190s, their engines snarling as they dove in with machine guns and cannons blazing. He tightened his grip on his twin 50-caliber machine guns and fired, sending a stream of tracer rounds into the sky. The other gunners aboard the B-17 did the same, turning the sky into a chaotic, swirling battlefield. The German fighters were relentless. They swarmed the isolated bomber, knowing it was only a matter of time before the weight of their attacks would bring it down. Bullets and cannon shells tore through the fuselage. The B-17 shuddered as it took hit after hit. Moran kept firing, his nerves like steel, but the situation was growing worse by the second. Then it happened. A shell struck the aircraft's midsection with devastating force. The explosion rocked the plane, and in an instant, Rikki-Tikki-Tavi was ripped in half. The front of the aircraft, where the pilots and most of the crew were stationed, spiraled out of control, plunging toward the earth in flames. The tail section, Moran's post, was violently severed and sent tumbling through the sky. Moran was trapped. The sheer force of the explosion had pinned him inside his tiny compartment. The tail section spun wildly, the earth below rushing closer. The rest of the crew had either bailed out or perished in the front section's fiery descent. But Moran had no such luxury. He was still inside the doomed aircraft, completely at the mercy of fate. At this altitude, there was no time to think, only react. But what could he possibly do? His parachute was unreachable. The tail section was spinning, plummeting thousands of feet per minute. The odds of surviving such a fall were beyond impossible. As the wreckage screamed toward the ground, Moran braced for the impact he knew would come. But then, against all odds, something remarkable happened. The tail section struck a dense forest of fir trees. Instead of smashing into the ground at full speed, the trees acted as a buffer, absorbing much of the impact. The branches and thick trunks slowed the descent, crumpling the metal but preventing total annihilation. Finally, the wreckage crashed into the forest floor with a violent jolt. And somehow, unbelievably, Eugene Moran was still alive. Surviving the fall was one thing. Surviving enemy territory was another. Injured and disoriented, Moran found himself alone in the heart of Nazi Germany. The burning wreckage of his tail section was his only company, and he knew it was only a matter of time before German soldiers arrived. What followed was a harrowing ordeal of survival, one that tested every ounce of his resilience and strength. Captured by enemy forces, Moran became a prisoner of war, forced to endure the brutal conditions of captivity. His story did not end with the crash. It was only the beginning of a different kind of battle. It's a book that explores not only Moran's incredible fall, but the journey that followed. His resilience, his captivity, and the long road home. War stories are often about heroism in the heat of battle, but sometimes the most extraordinary tales come from those who simply refuse to let fate have the final say. Eugene Moran was one of those men, and his story will forever remain one of the most unbelievable survival stories of World War II.